My next guest has spent 2 decades tracing the 14th century long encounter between Islam and Christendom. From the fall of the old Christian Middle East to the Barbary Wars that gave America its first fight as a nation. Here with us tonight to discuss Europe's migration crisis and its rapidly fading Christian identity, please welcome historian and author of The Two Swords of Christ, Raymond Ibrahim. Raymond, thanks for being here. You've said recently that Muslim migrants are being invited into Europe, not invading it. Is European migration, is that crisis about Islam, or is it really about Europe that's forgotten its Christian roots?
But I would actually argue it's the latter, because historically we could talk about Islamic invasions. That's what happened. That's most of the what we call the Islamic world today was formerly Christian territory that was conquered piecemeal. All of North Africa, the Middle East, later on Asia Minor, what we call Turkey, Spain was conquered, portions of France, and then the Balkans much later. Slave raids into Iceland, the Barbary Wars, as you mentioned, against America. All of that was by force, and you could call it an invasion. But today we're living in a time where the Islamic world is actually very weak. It can't force its way into anything. And we see that simply by looking at other countries in Europe, for example, Hungary and Poland, that have very strict, open anti-Muslim migration. And this issue isn't happening. Then you look at other countries, the UK and Germany, France, Sweden, lots of other countries. And these countries tend to be even more powerful than the other ones I mentioned, economically and militarily, politically, and yet they're suffering from this as people see it, an Islamic invasion. And this is why I insist this is not an invasion. You have to understand the root source of it. It's they're being invited, they're being allowed in. They could be stopped. So it is something else, in my opinion. This is just, and I often give different analogies, but as, to make it to simplify it, one can say, and I'm not trying to call Muslims lions or animals, but you can say a lion attacks zebras. We know this, and they feed on them. But now, and today, in the 21st century, humans have advanced and they're able to tame and domesticate and put animals in cages and separate them. Now, if I all of a sudden decide to put a lion in a zebra enclosure and the lion starts attacking the zebras, who's really at fault now? Is it the lion or is it me? I think really the ultimate responsibility and blame rests with me. And that's how I see the current situation in Europe.
And you make the case that modern Western Christianity shrank itself into something private, Jesus and me, just here, out of the public limelight, out of the public square. How did that theological and spiritual retreat open Europe to being overtaken by what you call a hostile ideology?
Yeah, that's exactly right. This is how Christendom ultimately died. It stopped being a social, cultural, civilizational force and was essentially atomized into an abstract idea. I am saved, and that's all there is to it. And in as much as that's been done, this has created a vacuum. So in the earlier example I gave, where Muslims did invade Christendom, well, Christians fought back tooth and nail. And this was at a time, by the way, when Europe was much weaker than the Islamic world. So they paid a huge cost, lots of deaths in defending and trying to repulse Islamic invaders. But that's because they had something to live for. They had a civilization and a culture and a faith. But now when you've removed that and it's been atomized into just some abstract idea in the minds of some people, and then the rest are what we would call secular, atheistic, well, they're materialists, they're hedonists, and all these ideas are just not enough to fight for. And so this is why in many ways Islam is filling that vacuum spiritually in the West, because you need a spiritual, religious, substantive idea to actually actuate a civilization. And if it's not there, and it's not in most of Western Europe, well, a hostile force is coming and filling that vacuum.
You draw a line between the Islam faith tradition and the ideology, Islam as a political ideology. Talk to me about that and how that is grossly misunderstood in the West.
Well, honestly, historically, it was the political manifestation of Islam that was dominant. Let's not forget the word Islam or Islam in Arabic simply means submission, to submit. Well, what are we submitting to? Well, historically, traditionally, and even in the current era, if you speak to pious Muslims, you're submitting to the laws of Allah. Okay, this is not again, unlike modern manifestations of Christianity that have been abstracted into just an idea of me and God love each other, Islam is very legal centric. And so
Right.
it's about what you do in the now. It's political. You can't
Hmm.
speak of a separation of church and state in an Islamic context. And this is why historically the caliphate, which is the primary manifestation of Islamic rule, was 100% a religious theocracy. The caliph is simply the successor of Muhammad. Okay, that's all that word means. A
Yeah.
caliph is the follower of Muhammad, and this again underscores that Muhammad, the prophet, was a political figure. Okay, so historically, so when we talk about Islam, we're talking about the enforcement and the spread and the domination of what we call Sharia law, which
Hmm.
is how to live according to Islam. And much of Sharia law, in my opinion, you could say it's neutral. It doesn't impact me. It's whatever Muslims want to do. However, there are a number of things that are antithetical to what Western, especially Christian civilization would teach,
Right.
including killing the apostate and blasphemers, polygamy, sex slavery, concubinage, etc.
Yeah, yeah, and you've placed Islam alongside fascism and communism as expansionist ideologies of the last century. I mean, and it is true historically. You see the march of Islam. How do you interpret what's happening now in America, let's say, where you have groups of people coming in Dearborn, Michigan, in parts of Texas, where entire areas really are being populated by design, populated to create what you mentioned a moment ago, a Sharia law, a counter society, if you will, a bubble of society that operates under Sharia law.
It's honestly, it's outrageous when a person, a normal person, a Western or a Christian person, steps back and looks at what's happening. Because and we go back to the idea that this issue is being invited in. America is supposed to have its own law and its own culture and its own way of doing things.
Hmm.
So why would you bring in something that, like I said, is very antithetical, and then kind of turn a blind eye and allow it to take root and grow? And America is unfortunately on the same trajectory as most of Western Europe.
Hmm.
A lot of people in America say, no, we're better than that. Honestly, it's not that. It's just because we don't have as many Muslims as they do. And when
Hmm.
and we do, it will be the same sort of capitulation, probably, or acquiescence, at least. So it's really strange seeing. And remember, when you bring in, and this goes back to the political thing,
Yeah.
when you bring in people who are Muslims, it's not just, oh, I have my own faith, but I'm going to fit in and assimilate in your civic society.
Right.
Like I said, it's a political thing. So they're coming in with already political ideas,
Mm.
laws that they want to enforce and live under, which, like I said, oftentimes clash directly with Western or Christian law.
Mm.
Um, and so, I mean, one of the most simplest one is Islam teaches Muslims they have to have hatred for non-Muslims, and this is in Quran, Surah 60, ayah or verse 4, where it says you have a good example in Ibrahim, the patriarch Ibrahim, when he told his people, enmity and hatred shall last between us until you believe in Allah alone. So already you're bringing in a very tribal mentality of us versus them,
Mm.
Muslims versus everyone, Americans in this case,
Hmm.
and you're planning them in. And at the same time, this religion also teaches Muslims, oh, if you're in a position of weakness, well, you can feign, you can pretend that you've assimilated or that you're friendly or that you like the infidel. So there's also that at work, and it's a very,
Mm.
it's a very potent tonic, and you bring it into Western countries that are really naive and clueless to this sort of thing, and you see what's happening. It's mass exploitation.
Well, you're seeing though in Europe, I mean in Ireland, in France, there is a backlash. You see these parties rising up against the really recolonization, if you will, of those countries in ways that they never imagined. Um, do you think that that trend will continue? And what of America?
Yeah, I think the trend will continue, and that trend is also noteworthy for something else, which really underscores that this is by design.
Hmm.
We could go back a couple decades ago and say, oh, these politicians with their open door, or multicultural policies were mistaken, okay, and the proof is before us, right? Now you look at a
Hmm.
place like Britain, a report came out and it said something like at least a quarter million British
Yeah.
girls were systematically raped by
Mm.
Pakistani Islamic rape gangs and so forth. And now that the people are reacting and are angry, one of the last incidences is in Belfast, a Muslim tried to behead a man.
Yeah.
In London, a few years earlier, people forget, Lee Rigby, a soldier, was beheaded in the
Yeah.
street by Muslims. So and people are getting very angry and responding, and what is the government doing? Well, they're doubling down, and they're actually arresting those native Brits and other Europeans who dare notice and speak out. So this is why I really believe this really, like I said, emphasizes that this is by design, because instead of admitting, okay, we're wrong, the proof's in the pudding, as it were, we've seen the repercussions of our actions, open doors, migration. Now we're going to do something about it. No, what they're doing is they're shutting people down and continuing with the same kind of mentality and enforcing, Sharia. King Charles of England just, announced, instead of being the defender of the faith, he's now going to be the defender of the faiths, which to me simply means it's another way of saying now we're really going to defend Islam from criticism, which they call Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Okay, so but we'll see what happens with these types of uprisings by the people.
Yeah. Your most recent book, The Two Swords of Christ, tells the story of warrior monks, Templars, and Hospitallers, men who the church has not formally recognized as martyrs, even though they died defending the faith. How should we look at this period of history, and in what ways should they be looked to provide us with a spiritual foundation of the fight that may lie ahead?
The battle is already at hand. It's just a matter of the church and Christians in general recognizing it and responding to the battle. Like I said, and I say this because I'm very acquainted with history, and the Islamic element has not changed. The impetus for conquest and subjugation of the infidel, of the Christian, is unwavering. It was there in the past, and I briefly touched on it historically, and it's still here in the present. So the war is going on, and it's just time for Christians, the church, etc., to acknowledge it and to do something about it. That's why it seems to me there's actually a spiritual element to this,
Right.
a diabolical element that is very much has paralyzed the church and Christians.
I'm going to leave it there. The Two Swords of Christ, 5 Centuries of War Between Islam and the Warrior Monks of Christendom by Raymond Ibrahim is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you for being here.